Ancient artifacts that have absolutely no business existing when they did are the topic of this video. Now we're going to talk about a few items that might be explainable whenever you take a deep look at the technology of that item's time, like the Antikythera Mechanism, but we're also going to talk about a few that are not explainable under any circumstances. I'm telling you, some of these things straight up have to be like aliens or time travel or something. They're so out of place. So let's get into it right now. We're going to kick things off with the Baghdad Battery, which is an ancient collection of items that were found together that whenever combined give off 1.1 volts of direct current electricity. These items include a ceramic jar with a cylindrical copper tube through the top of it with an iron rod sticking through that copper tube. Now it's made so the jar can be filled with vinegar or another electrolytic solution. The iron rod is separated from the copper cylinder through the top of it by a bushing made of asphalt, likely so the voltage doesn't transfer over and just get wasted, something like that. It only gave off 1.1 volts of electricity, so if it was diluted at all, it probably wouldn't have even accomplished its purposes that it was made for. Now obviously 1.1 volt of electricity is not very much compared to most modern batteries, but the fact that they figured out how to do this at all is awesome. See, this thing was found in 1936 in a village near Baghdad, and it's thought to date all the way back to the Sasanian or Parthian empires. The Parthian Empire was an Iranian-based empire that ruled from about 247 BC to 224 AD, and the Sasanians followed that until 650 AD in the same area. Either way you look at it, the Baghdad Battery is at least 1300 years old, so what in the world were people doing with this technology all the way back then? The leading theory is that they used it for electroplating gold onto silver objects. Looking at it historically, you see that a lot of Iraqi artifacts are made of silver and they have a very thin sheet of gold plated onto them. This battery would have put out just enough electricity to use in this electroplating process. So basically what we can take away from this is that over 1,000 years before Europeans and Americans figured out any form of electricity, these ancient Mesopotamians were using it to make their stuff look cooler with gold. Just really quick, thank you a ton for watching. You have absolutely no idea how much it means to me. If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And now let's get back into it. Switching gears now, let's bring it over to America with the London Hammer. Now I know what you're thinking. This guy just said America and then he said London in the same sentence. So what in the world is he talking about? Well, I did say that. The London Hammer is an iron-headed, wooden-handled axe that was found in London, Texas in 1936. The hammer's handle is embedded in what looks to be an ancient rock formation which sprang a massive controversy because it's a modern hammer. Or at least we think it's a modern hammer. Now what immediately followed the discovery of this hammer was a geologist coming out and saying that it dates all the way back to the Cretaceous period, which was like the height of the dinosaurs. This guy used this hypothesis to push creationism and the erroneous dating of human evolution and stuff like that because it was a modern hammer found in ancient rocks, stuff like that. Now he did get tons of backlash for this. Most of these other geologists believed that it was a modern hammer, but the rock around it was like chemically soluble, so basically water with a different pH came through and kind of melted the rock down and it formed around the hammer handle, something like that. Now I'll tell you right now that I do believe in God and elements of creationism and stuff like that, but this guy using this as evidence was dumb and it makes creationists look bad because he just didn't understand the science behind it. In all actuality, the hammer was probably dropped by a miner like 100 years ago, and like I said, this rock was really soft chemically, so it kind of melted down and formed around the hammer handle. But who knows? Maybe our ancestors really were all the way back in the Cretaceous period chasing around dinosaurs with big hammers. Who knows? Let's travel to ancient Greece now and talk about the Antikythera Mechanism. This thing was basically the world's first analog computer. It was used in ancient Greece as a model of the solar system and to predict eclipses and solar movement, stuff like that. The mechanism was found at the bottom of the ocean in a shipwreck off the coast of Antikythera, Greece in 1901. It's at least as old as the shipwreck that it was a part of, that it was found in, so at least all the way back to 60 BC. But some researchers think that due to the astronomical predictions and stuff that the thing had on it, that it dates all the way back to 200 BC. Now let's talk about those predictions and how this thing actually worked for a second. It's comprised of a bunch of gears and scales that were so complicated that they wouldn't be replicated until like 1,000 years later. This thing was finely crafted from bronze, and the faces of the mechanism itself represent the different solar bodies in our solar system. Once upon a time, it had a hand crank that was connected to a shaft which had a main gear connected to it, that connected to the gears that turned all the faces of the mechanism, so everything would move in tandem when you move the hand crank. Solar predictions and accuracy of everything aside, the mechanics of this mechanism were amazing. Like, that's what we see in modern day gear systems. I look at them a lot because I work on stuff, It's crazy that they had this back then. It also shows how sophisticated the Greeks were in their understanding of the stars. I would argue that it wasn't just the Greeks that made this mechanism though, it was more of an amalgamation of all the different Hellenistic cultures of the time. It actually used the Egyptian calendar and Babylonian astronomy to pair with that Greek math and mechanics and all that kind of stuff. Now its actual creators are unknown, but it's likely that Archimedes, who was the most famous mathematician of all time, had a hand in at least the math part of it. Alright, so now we know why it was created, when it was created, who created it, all that kind of stuff, but why was it so out of place? Now we have gear systems that are far more complex today because we have, you know, the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. But back in the day, this thing was not able to be replicated or anything nearly as complex created until 1,000 years after the Antikythera Mechanism sank to the bottom of the ocean. They would have needed an extremely complex knowledge of engineering and precision in their engineering to make something like this. And all the way back then, I really don't know how they even did it. Next up, we have an entry that might point to some extraterrestrial involvement. The Dropa Stones. These are actually pseudo-archaeological artifacts, meaning they may or may not be real, and even if they are real, they're probably not real like the stories say they are, but anyway, we're talking about them. The old tale says that in 1937, a Chinese archaeologist led an expedition into the mountains between China and Tibet. What he found were caves filled with regularly arranged graves that were 4 foot long. These graves contained the remains of beings that were about 4 foot tall with abnormally large heads. Now I hope you can see where this is going. Well, buried with the bodies were 716 granite discs that were inscribed with tiny hieroglyphics that date back all the way back to 12,000 years ago. There were even some star maps in there. Somehow a Chinese professor transcribed these hieroglyphics though. I don't know how they read them because it's not a real language, but anyway. These hieroglyphs told the story of the 4 foot tall beings known as the Dropa aliens. They crashed their spaceship into the earth 12,000 years ago and partially integrated into a local tribe in the Himalayas before they were like all but wiped out. They were hunted down by the locals. That's why they have their graves. This entire story is insane, especially whenever you consider the fact that no Western country has ever seen the discs or the graves or anything. Apparently though, the Soviets were able to get their hands on a few of these discs and they found that these discs were electroconductive, so like they could function for electricity, something on a spaceship, something like that. They were definitely alien in origin. That's what I'm hearing. Somehow I believe that the Chinese and Russians just teamed up to create communist alien propaganda, but that just may be me. I don't know. Tell me what you think about this down below because I bet it'll be fun to talk about. Did the ancient Egyptians witness an aircraft flight all the way back in 200 BC? Or was the Saqqara Bird just a symbolic creation? Well, in 1898, the Saqqara Bird was found in the excavation of an ancient Egyptian tomb, and this has been the question ever since. This thing is basically a model falcon that was constructed from sycamore wood that is all but capable of flight. It's constructed very similarly to a modern day glider, and if it had a vertical stabilizing tail, it probably would have been capable of flight, is what some people say. In all actuality, the falcon was very important to the ancient Egyptians because it represented two of their most important gods, Ra and Horus. I think it was simply made to resemble the falcon, which is in itself aerodynamic because it's a bird. Now, some people argue the simpler point that the ancient Egyptians might have had a little bit of knowledge about aerodynamics, while some take it way too far and say that they experienced an alien spaceship flying and that's why they figured out aerodynamics and created this falcon. I personally think they just liked the symbol of the falcon and wanted to create something to represent Ra and Horus, but that's up for you to decide. How could a map that was created in 1513 have an accurate depiction of Antarctica before it was covered in ice? Now I know what you're thinking, this guy is insane, but hear me out. The Piri Reis Map is a world map compiled by the Turkish Admiral Piri Reis in 1513 that's said to accurately depict the Americas, Europe, North Africa, and even possibly Antarctica. He's said to have used 20 source maps to compile his big map. He used 8 Ptolemaic maps, an Arabic map of India, Christopher Columbus's map of the West Indies, and 4 Portuguese maps of Asia. That still doesn't explain Antarctica, but we'll get there. The special thing about this map is that this guy created it during the height of the Ottoman Empire and went against basically everything they knew and said about maps and cartography. It was extremely ambitious and impressive and still studied all the way up until the 1960s. Alright, here's where it gets a little weird. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, which is like 300 years after this guy made this map. So how did he have knowledge of this? How did he sketch it? And was this Antarctica? In short, No, it probably wasn't Antarctica. It was probably a faulty depiction of like the southern coast of South America. Still, some theorists think that some of Piri's source maps might have dated all the way back to like the conquest of Alexander the Great. So he might have had something on these maps that he sourced that we don't know anything about. Something like Atlantis or lost civilizations, something like that. Even Antarctica, who really knows? But most likely, he just messed up. Deep within the pyrophyllite mines of Ottosdal, South Africa lay Klerksdorp Spheres, which are tiny little spheres that are basically impossible to study. That's not entirely true. You can study them, but we really have no idea of how they got there. Basically, they're small little spheres. The largest one ever was like 10 centimeters in diameter that are made of really weird mineral compositions that are found basically nowhere else on Earth. And these things themselves have never been found anywhere else on Earth either. So like there's no Klerksdorp Spheres anywhere else. Now these spheres have little lines around the center of them, so like some people think that they have to be manufactured by somebody, something, somewhere, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. Geologists believe that these spheres were formed over 2.8 billion years ago whenever volcanic activity moved and plates were shifting, all the weird stuff was happening, compressing the layers of the earth and minerals into what they are today. The easiest way that I have to explain what actually happened geologically was like in Minecraft when you take lava and water and make obsidian, something like that. Because these things, I think they really are shiny, at least in the pictures on Google Images. They're shiny little things. It's something like that. Anyway, fringe theorists believe that somebody, somewhere, sometime had to manufacture them. And even fringer theorists believe that they were manufactured by none other than, can you guess it? Aliens. The only reason that I see to believe that they were created by somebody is that they were not found anywhere else in the world at all, even though they might be out there somewhere and we just don't have access to those caves because this is in the middle of a mine in South Africa. But anyway, to dispute that reason right there, the mineral composition of the plates of the earth is different everywhere on the face of the earth. So really there's no explanation. We really might never know where these things came from. I really came to no conclusion on that one. I guess I just didn't have a lot to say. But speaking of having a lot to say, watch this video right here if you're interested in these ancient mysteries of the world. This is the Ancient Mysteries of the World iceberg. I had a lot to say in that one, and I guarantee you, if you like this one, you will like that video. Now, I'm going to head to the Himalayas and dig up a few graves and try to disprove some communist propaganda. Peace.